Hello everybody, welcome in this book tour video about the Industrializing Financial Services with DevOps, which is this one, my book that has been published by Packt almost a year ago, a little bit of 1 year anniversary this video is. So a book tour to take you through the main concepts of the book and either help you to better understand it if you are already reading it, or to motivate you to read it. Now, a little bit about me before we get started. I consider myself a well-rounded DevOps professional. I've been doing DevOps in different organizations, in different contexts, shapes and forms for many years now. I'm currently based in London. I'm a management consultant at the moment, but I have a lot of experience from the industry. Close to 13 years working with financial services technology, almost all my life, for good or bad. And I've done DevOps adoptions at scale in British, French and Nordic banks. My DevOps favorite is Site Reliability Engineering. This is chapter 13 of the book, a quite lengthy and meaty one, actually. Let's get to the content of the video now. So, I have a couple of disclaimers that underpin the book itself, not the presentation, this book tour. The book is an end-to-end playbook. It starts from the idea of why DevOps is applicable to banking, taking you how you're going to realize benefits of an adoption. So, it is advisable not to skip chapters. Of course, probably you have interest in certain ones, but I would advise you, if you have the time and desire, of course, to read it chapter by chapter so you can follow the whole journey. It is packed with handcrafted frameworks that I've designed over the years based on adoptions that I have done in different environments, and it's also packed with real industry examples. Obviously agnostic and anonymized. It gives you a sense on how things can be applied in the real world. It is primarily based on financial services, because that's my background, but it's industry agnostic. So you can read it and use the main frameworks for another industry, lift and shift. You don't even need to adjust them. It does have international relations terms in it, on the one hand because international relations is my second passion after DevOps, but also because I found a lot of relations on international relation terms and how societies evolve over the years, with also how organizations evolve. So I've done some linkages that I hope you're going to find interesting, and that is packed with several lessons learned. So basically helping you to avoid pitfalls that others face. Let's get now into the content of the book tour. So part 1, we're introducing not DevOps, but more our main actor of the book. And we outline the value proposition in relation of DevOps with that main actor, as well as laying some core foundation that is underpinning not only the book itself, but a DevOps transformation at scale. So starting, we introduce a globally systemically important bank. This is our main actor. So this bank has already a DevOps adoption historically happening, but they would like to evolve it and get it more into sync and looking more long term and more into harmony. And in order to understand why they want to do that, we examine the internal and external context of them. So we look into what happens outside the market, but also within the bank, to better understand how DevOps can support into materializing the bank's corporate strategy. Then we define the value proposition of DevOps for banking using the example of mobile banking, and we outline it from a business perspective as well as technological perspective and what it means for end users trying to connect the dots. And then we go into the importance of adapting DevOps at relevance, and in order to help explaining that, I'm using the example of capital markets within a bank, which is one of the business lines in a typical large bank. And then I'm going into equity trading and equity settlement, which is two functions within capital markets, to on the one hand explain the differences of these two entities within markets, but also the difference of markets compared to payments, for instance. This is a very important element when adopting DevOps at scale, to look into different perspectives within your organization and adjust your adoption based on the different needs. And then closing the chapter, I'm explaining why you should tackle a DevOps transformation from a 360 perspective. I provide a definition of DevOps that we are using in the book. And on this one, you're gonna see that I'm linking processes, corporate strategy, people, technology. Everything becomes a nice blend to make sure that you capture holistically what I propose to be done when you want to advance at scale. Then we go on chapter number 2. We deep dive into multi-speed banking. We discuss conditions, we discuss circumstances. I'm bringing richer examples from different banking areas. I'm going down into regulatory aspects on reliability, time to market, just to explain to you why you need to understand the different conditions and circumstances within your organization before you start doing a DevOps adoption or advancement at scale. And then on this one, I explain why it is important to not only capture these contexts, but link them together. So I provide 4 levels here as an example, and that gets you to understand from how you can link what happens to your external market to what happens in a specific unit within your organization, just to understand how you need to address different areas in this evolution of yours. Moving on, I'll give you some tips on how to define your vision and how to link that into objectives, key results, and also the linkage of the corporate strategies to those. Because if you have worked in a large organization, you know that anything you do needs to be plugged in and linked to your corporate strategy in order really to happen. So I provide some tips on why this should happen, and also the importance of realizing benefits having done that. I provide then a summary of the main OKRs. I propose to you 8 OKRs that I feel are sufficient, and this is what I've seen across my experience as repetitive and essential ones across different institutions, and how you can link those into eventually getting up with a single liner that describes your vision. Moving on, we discuss about different types of transformation or advancements. So how radical you might want to be. If you just want to do incremental changes, you need to find the argumentation and the reasoning behind setting the sense of urgency and the tune of your transformation, as well as you need to have a method to capture the forces that they got act towards that transformation and support it, or they got act against it. So it's really important to know from the beginning what are the elements that are going to play in your favor and what are not. Part number 2. Here we start introducing the 360 DevOps operating model structure, governance, and some orchestration mechanisms that I see vital in order to define it and get to enable it. Chapter 3, we are discussing about the core pillars, which are here in brief. First one is the bodies that will give you direction and orchestrate this adoption, your main sponsors, ways of working, center of excellence, and so on. Part number 2 discusses about the capability, DevOps capability and enablers evolution. So which are those you need to bring into play, what can you divest, can new capabilities you need to build in, interoperability points to get them together in an ecosystem. Then the last part is discussing about how to roll out these capabilities, how to accelerate in certain cases, in certain parts of the organization and to move faster, and then how to scale it further to capture your broader organic adoption, as we name it in the book. We're discussing the vital role of different bodies here. This is just a proposal of mine on how you can structure. You can do it in different ways. So I'm discussing the importance of having a vision authority, some orchestrators, the importance of work streams, but also to identify holistically the parts of your ecosystem that need to be part of the evolution. And to help you on this one, I have a table. This is just a summary. It's a very lengthy one on the different stakeholders that I see you need to engage and what is the value proposition. So what can they offer to that? Because an anti-pattern that I've seen in my career in DevOps adoption is very selective handpicking of stakeholders, omitting many important actually. And then I propose, okay, you have gathered the people together, you have a vision, you have OKRs, okay, how do you get into motion of enabling the model? And I'm proposing some work streams along with their ways of working and what the outcome should be on materializing the OKRs, then eventually your model. I discussed the importance of understanding governing dynamics. This thing in large organization that is called politics. So you got everybody together, but people have different agendas. Some providing some, allow me to call it spicy information in there on how you can identify the dark nights or not. Really important part of a transformation. And then I'm providing some different use cases of 3 different organizations that were structured differently in order to map those dynamics into the way that people behaved based on the org structure when those transformations took place. Again, a little bit of spicy information on what happens out there in the industry. Chapter number 4, we are breaking two main enablers of a DevOps transformation. One is the enterprise architecture and the other one is your DevOps Center of Excellence. We discussed the value proposition of enterprise architecture. So why do you need your enterprise architecture function to front run this work? And we go from defining the business critical domains of your organization. Here is an example of how a typical globally systemically important bank looks like. Then going one further down into discovering and appointing the critical parts of your business flows. So what are the main flows enabling a domain? And then going further to that, define the modernization journeys of your different platforms. So linking the dots of the business and platform evolution together, so you can then map the DevOps adoption into it and make sure on the one hand that it does enable it, but also on the other hand that it does influence it tactically and drastically as well. A very important chapter on this one, again a point that I see missing in the organization, this linkage between business domains and platform modernization with the overall DevOps adoption. Moving on, we're discussing the DevOps Center of Excellence. I don't remember how many different shapes and forms I've seen of Centers of Excellence. I'm giving you 4 use cases in this book, I've seen more. We're discussing the different roles that the DevOps Center of Excellence can have, and then the importance of being very specific about this role and provide the service model of it. So how the DevOps Center of Excellence will service the rest of the organization. I do have an example here of what potentially that can be, but a very rich chapter, this one, and many different ideas you can think of about how to enable your DevOps COE in the adoption. Now, as I mentioned, I'm giving you 4 different use cases here on how I've seen DevOps Centers of Excellence being built, with the pros and cons in the different approaches, right? Nothing is perfect. Chapter 5, Business Enterprise Agility and DevOps ways of working. So I'm starting with discussing the relation of enterprise agility and DevOps. In every single organization I've been part of, the two were linked together. So it was a Spotify model and DevOps adoption, it was value streams and DevOps adoption, things were coming together, and there's very practical and reasons about it that I provide in the book. Then I'm giving you the 4 dominant enterprise agility frameworks I have worked with. This is an example of the Spotify model, and I'm not just giving you the frameworks like what Spotify model is, I'm mapping it to a DevOps adoption as well. So yeah, as you can see in here, we discuss about DevOps roles, for instance, we discuss about the compliance as code guild. So I'm giving you input on how you can take this enterprise agility frameworks and reconcile them with your DevOps adoption. Then we discuss a paradox, I call it. So when organizations shift towards enterprise agility, they want primarily to create autonomy and self-sufficiency, but is that really the case? And here I'm lucky enough because I'm Greek actually, and autonomy is a Greek word, and I'm giving you some very nice explanation here, going from the ancient Greece and the dictionary definition of what autonomy is to how it's perceived in organization. It's really important to understand the level of autonomy you want to give to people, otherwise you might just bombard the whole enterprise agility and DevOps reconciliation perspective. And then we discuss about different enterprise agility frameworks, and I have found commonalities because I work with all of them on how you can map DevOps to them. Here is some principles actually that you can use it to make sure that whatever your enterprise agility framework, you can map it to your DevOps adoption. And if your organization in the future shifts from Safe to Spotify, that won't disturb your DevOps adoption because still it's going to act as an enabler in a lift and shift perspective, and it can happen, trust me, if well thought, well designed and well executed. And then ways of working framework. So basically you have an enterprise agility model, you do have your DevOps adoption. I don't really like to call it topologies because it's mostly ways of working, but I do have a tailor-made framework on how, if you remember, the stakeholders I mentioned in the previous chapter, you can glue them all together to make sure that they both enable your enterprise agility framework as well as your DevOps adoption. This is a very nice mechanism actually, it's very well proven, I've done it several times. Part number 3, capability engineering, enablement and launch. So what have we got now in the book? We've got a vision, we have understood our context, we have OKRs, we have a governance body, we have work streams, we have defined the ways of working, defined different centers of excellence, centers of practices that will help us to enable the model. Now we need to look at the heart of it. We need to look into how we can engineer capabilities that will enable this adoption and how we can launch them in your organization. This is what part 3 is about. And we start with the software development lifecycle, because this is basically the backbone of every DevOps adoption. So how do you, from ideation to design of software, get to deliver a piece of code in production that is being used by your end users, and that is providing you feedback loops back to your backlog. And here I mentioned 4 main principles that you need to consider when you design your future SDLC. One is completeness, to make sure that you provide complete capabilities. The second one is continuity. This is basically flow based on value streams, and I do have a framework about it. It's the example that I'm telling when I'm working with clients. For instance, that with your finger, you should, with zero disturbance, follow the code from the code repo all the way to production. Reconcilability, so capabilities that come from different parts of your organization, different frameworks that you have adopted, that they come together and don't violate each other. And interoperability. Interoperability means the higher degree of automation and the higher degree of event-driven flows across your SDLC. Super important ones to take into account when doing value stream mapping. And then I'm providing, allow me to call it my approach, because it's really handcrafted on how I define the different continuity pillars in the SDLC, and how I balance time to market, reliability, compliance, which are the three main factors that drive your software development lifecycle, underpinning the principles that I mentioned previously. And then having done that, I'm providing to you an 8-step guide on how to start with your critical path of your capabilities, and then enrich it and provide completeness and interoperability and cater for different speeds. Kind of a value stream mapping exercise on how to get there. Now, to inspire you, closing this chapter, I provide to you a catalog that you can see in here of the core capabilities that I see they need to be enabled. But I'm not telling you how to enable them, obviously, and I don't link them together, because on the one hand I don't know your context and what you want to achieve, but on the other hand I want to give you the creativity on try and link all these dots, because in essence they can be linked together. So next one, technology. The most important maybe enabler for many different reasons, but also a misunderstood relationship that I'm busting in this chapter. So normally, and people perceive DevOps as CI/CD pipelines. A CI/CD pipeline is just an enabler of DevOps. All the confusion with the public cloud service. A public cloud service is just an enabler for DevOps. So I'm busting this myth here, explaining how I perceive technology being an enabler and not DevOps itself. A very important one for people that have it misinterpreted. As I have here on the chapter, I have a CI/CD pipeline, I do DevOps. And that's something that one told me years ago, an engineer in one of the banks. So understanding this one now, I'm explaining why normally organizations combine DevOps transformations with engineering transformations. And there's certain reasons. Engineering your technological stack helps to foster and facilitate the DevOps adoption, and I've seen that in every single company. I'm outlining what is the value proposition and why I also propose you do that. Also, what I've seen in organizations is they use DevOps adoption as a mean for technology standardization, and while that might sound very appealing, there's certain precautions that you need to take, and I have them in here. Standardization won't always work in your favor, and it has a lot of hidden blind spots when being done. I have discovered a lot of them in my career, and I'll provide you a complete list of mind the gap or mind the standardization, to put it that way. Then we're going to discuss platform teams, which is a hot topic in the industry. We discuss what are the different platform team designs you can take. I'm proposing what I've seen working always. That's a triangular platform team. I haven't seen it failing in every single organization, sorry. We discuss service models of these platform teams. We mentioned the importance of developer experience. We touched briefly upon federalization against centralization and what are the key considerations to take. And then I'm providing you examples of 5 core platform teams. So basically I mostly give you the value proposition. Here is the one about IT service management. What is the value proposition of enabling them, but also what is the potential service catalog? So what are the capabilities that they're going to be responsible for from your new software development life cycle, and can offer them as a service to the rest of your organization. Chapter number 8, we discuss about compliance. And here is where I mean disagreement with many. I see compliance as the most fundamental DevOps enabler, in my opinion. Normally organizations see compliance as red tapes that they gotta slow you down. In my opinion, it's a blessing to have your regulator around where you do DevOps. And I explain that in the book actually, or what is the reason. I provide a holistic overview of what compliance means from a DevOps perspective. It's not just your regulator, it's not just a regulatory requirement about, I don't know, trading transparency. It is much more to that. It's risk management frameworks and other things. So I'm providing an overview on where your compliance requirements are coming from. And that's very important at the beginning of the chapter, because I tell you at the end of the chapter on how to reconcile all these requirements together to make sure that they work with each other on your DevOps adoption and they don't violate each other. And then I'm breaking to you 4 stories, real stories of my experience on how we took in certain places advantage of heavy regulatory requirements to promote very radical DevOps transformations. And that's to enforce my argument that compliance is one of the core enablers of DevOps. So here you can see story 2, MiFID 2 adoption. Very interesting one. So we were faced with the requirement from a regulator. We look into our stack, we couldn't meet that requirement, we have redone everything, and it became a flagship DevOps adoption in that place. I have 3 more of that very interesting ones. And then I'm going a little bit to discuss about DevOps controls, because collecting all your regulatory requirements, eventually you're gonna get into what is called DevOps controls framework. And I'm giving you some parameters on what you need to look at when you design those, right? You can see here quite complete, breaking together value proposition, frameworks, technology, evidence, and owner. This is a complete guide on how you can define a control, bits and pieces of implementation, as well as you can provide the necessary evidence to make sure that you convince your regulator and your internal audit teams that you are adhering to it. Then in the next chapter we talk about the notorious segregation of duties, separation of tasks, they call it somewhere else, separation of concerns somewhere else. I like the segregation of duties, that's the term that the European Central Bank is using. Normally this is perceived as a main showstopper in a DevOps adoption. In my opinion, it's not. I'm providing to you here a framework that I'm also linking back to the ways of working, design of how your teams operate together, to explain that, okay, segregation of duties is something you gotta have in place. But if you adopt it based on intelligence and not convenience and red tapes, it can really be smooth. So a very, very important chapter, this one actually, the segregation of duties is top 3 probably challenges on enabling DevOps in organizations. And then closing this chapter, I had the pleasure to do a lot of compliance work. If you read the chapter, you're gonna realize I'm bringing you together my very best of knowledge and experience on what you need to do when you're addressing your regulators when it comes to compliance on DevOps. So things like evidence format and frequency, deadlines I have here, your SOD approach, is it a recommendation, is it a requirement, right? What is mandatory, what is nice to have? A lot of intelligence actually in this chapter on compliance. And then now we have done almost everything. We have a vision, a US DLC, we have defined controls, we have platform teams, centers of excellence, amazing. And now we have to go and mobilize towards actual adoption. And this is part 4 in the last part of the book. So what we're going to discuss here, we're going to discuss portfolio classification and governance to start with. So how do you classify your portfolio? You remember the speeds I mentioned previously, you remember the business critical flows, right? All these things now come into play together. And I'm discussing how you're going to classify your portfolio on business domains, application services. Here is an example. And then how you can look at it from 2 different perspectives, primarily from a criticality and a speed perspective, as well as enterprise architecture and modernization journeys, as we mentioned before, to not only capture its parameters, but define whether a certain part of your portfolio is evolving to. I'm using also the formula of speed here, with speed in the book doesn't mean time to market, it means several other elements. Reading this chapter, you're gonna get a better picture. Then I'm providing some parameters here about availability, criticality, this example, but also others you can consult in order to demarcate your portfolio in a harmonious way. a little bit here on the DevOps speed formula. You can see I'm bringing together time to market, reliability, compliance, business context. It's a little bit of a mixture. It's a mixture of important elements, not to misunderstand what speed really means. And here is an example of how you can register an application and how you can map that to certain DevOps elements. On the one hand, to explain to people what they need to do to adhere with your new DevOps operating model, as well as to define targets. So we are looking about things like availability here, criticality, DevOps model ways of working, CI/CD pipelines, a very nice blend of things you're interested to know per application or business domain. Closing this chapter, I'm providing two very important frameworks that I see vital. The one is the license to continuously deliver. So certain parameters to be able to deliver software on demand during working hours, intraday, a proven and necessary framework, and then a production readiness review. So certain parameters that you want to be assessing your service against to make sure that it does meet your production readiness criteria to be promoted to production. Very much, it's not the same framework, it's two different ones. I'm explaining the interlinkage of the two. I see them vital in a DevOps adoption, actually, out of the fundamental ones. Chapter number 10. Here we discuss about enterprise portfolio planning. So who is to go through the transformation first, who comes a little bit later, who is totally excluded maybe. I've seen that in organization is based on rationale. Some areas that won't be part of your DevOps transformation for obvious or non-obvious reasons. So here we're discussing what is the meaning of the tactical adoption, actually. Why do you need to focus into certain parts of your portfolio? You can't do the whole bank or the whole organization in one go. And I provide very well thought argumentation on why there is. And then a framework about how you can isolate the tactical adoption. Get this take, you remember the ecosystem we discussed in the previous chapter? So who should be part of the adoption? Now again they come into play. On how our ecosystem can surround this tactical adoption and offer to them the necessary means to adopt your new DevOps operating model, as well as give feedback back to those areas so they can improve the frameworks, right? And that's what I said, read the book in its totality, because everything links together eventually. We're discussing this one, and then we go a little bit into enterprise portfolio planning. So certain organizations have what they call enterprise portfolio planning. Is basically annual, and then it's broken down into quarters. And here I'm explaining to you how we can go from the DevOps evolution OKR, compliance as code in this example, and break it down into initiatives, epics, and user stories that your different teams will work against in order to adapt your new DevOps operating model. So another very important chapter, actually a lot of intelligence, industry intelligence here as well on how to do things. We close this chapter with yet another super important framework. So we have the tactical adoption, certain areas we're gonna put a lot of focus on, they're gonna go ahead, right? They've got the money, resources, we put the ecosystem around them and everything, but then you have the rest of the organization. So what happens to those, and how can you get the two into sync so you don't get the tactical ones to go far ahead, then the other ones struggle to cope and follow. And this is the minimum viable adherence framework. So basically the dark blue here is what is applicable to everybody. So everybody has to do it, maybe not with the same speed, but you know that this is how you baseline your organization. But then your tactical adoption, or areas that they have the capabilities, even though not in the tactical adoption, they can advance and go further. Yet another very vital framework here that will help you to sync and baseline in your adoption. Chapter number 11, benefits. Maybe the most important part actually. This is the most challenging bit I've seen in organizations. Okay, we've done so many great things. How do you realize that the really added value? And I'm starting the chapter actually with distinguishing between what is a key performance target. I'm not using the word KPI, key performance indicator, and I'm explaining in the book why, because indication is just indication. A target, it's something you want to meet. And I'm using key performance targets and metrics. And the metric basically is a data point that helps you to realize if you're getting close to materialize that target of yours. So a very important chapter, this one, taking one that has read the book and gave me feedback, said that's a really fresh perspective on how benefit realization should happen. So this is a very interesting chapter, this one. And I'm dividing the benefit realization into 3 pillars also, because there's no black and white, there's no 1 and 0. You can look at it from different perspectives. And I'm using the minimum viable adoption framework, as you can see from the previous chapter. And what I'm putting on this one is viable adherence, right? You have adopted the capability, but do you adhere to its policy, as an example? And then I'm adding efficiency performance. So how effective you are adhering to that policy. A very interesting framework, this one, that has a lot of applicability to real case scenarios. If again, you want to realize benefits in an intelligent way, and not just do it a 1 and 0 exercise. Moving on to this chapter, what I have done to help you a little bit structure your thinking is I have mapped the enterprise OKRs that would define in chapter 3 of the book to primary key performance targets and primary metrics. So what are the key performance targets that help you to see how or not you have materialized the OKRs, and what are the metrics that show you how close or not you are in essence. And also what I have done here, it is that I've demarcated them between what is a proof of success and what is the indication of success, because numbers don't tell you the truth always, and I'm putting a lot about the whispers in the corridor in the book as well. So people maybe tell you the truth, numbers don't. You have to be mindful of these things as well. But if I bring an example here, the fact that you met an SLA for all the application is an indication of success, while your change failure rate is a proof of success. So the fact that your application is available when it has to be doesn't mean that it's performing. You might have latency. So you have to really be careful and add that intelligence on the way that you realize how close or not you are to your objectives. And here I have a little bit of tips and tricks, actually. So what you need to be really careful on, there's a little bit of mean motives in organization when realizing benefits, right? One thing is, I have it here on top, is linked to people's bonuses, right? So you might be seeing the world a little bit more purified than it is, because you might get benefit out of that. And I have a lot of important considerations out of my experience on how to tackle the benefit realization bit. Now, closing this chapter, because I was a little bit in the funny mode writing it, I have highlighted the most crazy, let's call them, KPIs, because those organizations used to call them KPIs, that I disagree with the term, that they have defined to measure DevOps adoption. These are really funny ones, actually, and I'm welcoming you to send me if you have similar ones to those. I won't tell anybody. Chapter number 12, the most important asset, people. If you don't have people, you won't get far, actually. You might not even be able to get started. I'm defining the importance of creating P-safe profiles in your adoption. To have an example here, people that they need to know the big picture, have expertise in the big picture, but they know at least 2 of the main enablers of your DevOps adoption. That can help you in many different ways. Fill in skills gaps, mobilize people, rotate. You can read in the book all the motives I'm outlining. Then I'm providing some strategic considerations about your hiring tactic. That has to do with locations, it has to do with what to prioritize, how to prioritize, which areas hiring, when, and all the necessary stuff in order to acquire the necessary skills or build the necessary skills you need in your organization. Outlining the value proposition of rotations and mobility, that people move in different teams in order to create efficiencies and not only, and also make sure that, very importantly, you have a career path within your organization for people. So a quite small chapter, this one, but really essential when it comes into your actual DevOps adoption. And then we go to chapter 13. Chapter 13 is a bonus chapter, actually, so it goes a little bit outside the flow. You're gonna see I mentioned site reliability engineering all over the place, more or less, in the book. This is a dedicated chapter to of my passion about SRE, and I wanted it to be a dedicated chapter, actually. It is a very lengthy one, it's 40 plus pages of really solid content. So I'm discussing what is the value proposition of SRE in a DevOps transformation. SRE has to balance between tactical and organic in many different ways. I'm explaining that. And then I'm getting into a very important topic of discussion, which is, I call it DevOps versus SRE dilemma here. I don't believe it's versus, but that's how the industry, in most of the cases, is perceiving it. And I'm explaining why it's not a versus, what is the complementary one. So a very interesting chapter. Then I'm taking you through the SRE tenets. I'm paraphrasing or using a little bit differently the tenets term of Google, and that I've done in one of the banks back in the day. Tried to explain to them what Google means, and eventually worked. So then I just created a framework of it and I adopted it. And that tells you simply what is the 50% of responsibilities of SRE in operations and what is the 50% of improvements as an indication. Then I'm providing a reconciliation framework between ITIL and SRE. So one of the conflicts is SRE and DevOps of SRE, another conflict is SRE and ITIL. And I've seen it in every single organization. Sadly, I'm still seeing it in 2023, right? It's been now how many years? 7 years since SRE as a concept became publicly available by Google. And I'm explaining to people that ITIL and SRE are not conflictual, right? Simply, you can read the chapter. ITIL provides the governance of the processes for operations. SRE provides the process engineering. Simple as that, right? It's nothing more complex. It just excuses anything else you gotta hear. And then closing the chapter, I'm providing you different use cases, 4 different use cases of how I've seen SRE being adopted in the industry. Different approaches that people took. There's different SRE functions and roles you can create. I have that in the book. And again, pros and cons, right? So there's no one way to do SRE. Not every organization succeeded equally. So very, very interesting chapter, this one. And I wanted to give you even more, hopefully in the second edition. I'm gonna do that. And then we get into chapter 14, and basically what I do there, I summarize the most important aspects. I'm bringing it all together. So it's, I think, close to 10 pages, and it gives you a full-blown summary, right? Starting again from why DevOps in banking, going all the way on how to realize the benefits. I'm highlighting the most important frameworks and considerations to take. And here is actually where the book is closing. So I'd like to thank you very much for the ones that have purchased it. Actually, I wasn't expecting so much motion in sales and downloads. It's super lovely. Happy reading if you're already reading. Happy reading if you're gonna purchase it. And please let me know your feedback. It's very important for me also to hear different perspectives, but also to improve my writing style and content creation. Thank you very much for your time.